Hello and welcome to day one of the 2024 US Expats Financial Conference, brought to you by the American Expat Directory and sponsored by Expat Focus, the web's favorite destination for anyone moving or living abroad. We have a fantastic schedule for you consisting of 9 sessions over the next 3 days, covering multiple aspects of financial information for Americans moving and living abroad, with perspectives from some of the world's foremost experts in their fields. Today is the first day of the conference, and for this, our first session of the day, I'm delighted to be joined by Marylouise Serrato, Executive Director of American Citizens Abroad, aka ACA, who will be talking about possible legislative remedies for US taxation of expats. Thank you very much for joining us, Marylouise, and how are you today?
Thank you, Hugo. Thank you for inviting ACA to the US Expats Financial Conference, and we're thrilled to be your first presenter. Thank you again to the sponsors and to the conference and you for the invitation. Happy to be here.
Fantastic. Before we start, please bear in mind, this is for our audience, that the information presented is for general educational purposes only, and you should always seek your own personalized financial advice. Marylouise will be answering your questions after her presentation, so please add them in the Q&A pop-up at the foot of your screen throughout, and we'll try to answer them all at the end. So without further ado, over to you, Marylouise.
Okay, let's see if I can get this up and running. We've got that. Get my screen. Do you see my screen?
Not yet. So share screen.
Hang on. Share screen. Okay. Hang on.
That's working. And then
It's working. There we go.
Perfect. I'll leave you to it.
I'm trying to get to the slideshow, but for some reason it's not working. But you can see the slides, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try it again. I don't know why slideshow is it working there? No, but anyway, you can see the slides, so we'll just do it this way. So again, thank you for inviting ACA here to the conference. So before we start talking about specific legislation, I wanted to talk a little bit about ACA and ACAGF. So we were founded in 1978, and we were founded overseas. So we have 45 years of experience. And as I was just mentioning to Hugo before we started this, over time, we recognized the real importance of having a DC presence. And so we moved the organization to DC in 2012. And at that time, we created 2 branches, the ACA Inc., which is the advocacy organization. That's the organization that goes up to Capitol Hill, knocks on doors, and talks about all the issues important to the community. And then ACA Global Foundation, which is the research and educational organization of ACA. A big advantage to ACA is that we are nonpartisan. So our work is on behalf of the community. We have no political interests. We just want good policy. And also another really important aspect is that we are registered nonprofits. This really gives credibility up on Capitol Hill. They understand the 2 organizations, how we're quote unquote officially organized. ACA Inc. is a 501c4 and ACA Global Foundation is a 501c3. This really helps on Capitol Hill because they understand who they're talking to. ACA is really uniquely positioned to do the work that it does, given our reputation in DC. Like I said, over 45 years of experience, our professionalism. We have a really top tier team here in Washington, DC, not just myself, but others. And again, our proximity to Capitol Hill and to stakeholders. So what are the issues? You can see on this next slide, the issues, the big issues, the many of them that you all are interested in on today's conference, the taxation, the compliance issues with FATCA and FBAR, investing when you're living overseas, the GILTI and transition tax and how they have affected small businesses overseas. Those are taking up a lot of the oxygen in the room. There are also other specific issues more related to retirees, the Social Security windfall elimination provision. Some of you on this call may be familiar that if you are drawing from U.S. Social Security and a foreign pension, your U.S. Social Security potentially could be reduced because of the windfall elimination provision. Medicare, as many of you may know, is only available if you return to the United States, even if you've paid into the system over time. And again, we continue to pay attention to issues related to voting, citizenship, and representation. So on tax and compliance, which I know many of you are most interested in on today's talk, what does ACA do when we're educating Congress about the problems? So obviously we highlight that citizenship-based taxation is the root of many of the compliance and tax problems that Americans face overseas. And this is just a short list of some of the issues that we highlight with the Congress, some of the problems. I won't go through each and every one of them. It isn't an exhaustive list. There are obviously other issues and other problems related to the tax code. But our solution is residence-based taxation. You've probably heard about this or been aware of it. If you spent any time on the ACA website, you've seen that we've done a lot of work on residence-based taxation. What is residence-based taxation? So essentially, in a nutshell, it is income is taxed based on where it is earned and not on citizenship. So for American citizens, if you are earning income in a foreign jurisdiction, it is no longer taxable to the U.S. Treasury. ACA, I think maybe now it's been about 10 years ago, we developed a roadmap. Sometimes it's referred to as a vanilla approach. And what we did was we took the current tax code and next to it, we said, where do you need to carve into the tax code to make a change and adopt residence-based taxation? We firmly believe that the best way to confront this is not asking Congress to rewrite the entire tax code. We want to go in and we want to say, where do you need to carve into this code to get to residence-based taxation? And then we took another important step, because the roadmap or what we put together is not a piece of legislation. It is not, quote unquote, a proposal. It gives Congress a guideline. It says, if you want to address this problem, here's where the issues are. Take a look and see what you can do on these specific issues. However, back in 2017, we said, if someone were to write legislation to this proposal, how much would it cost the U.S. Treasury? Because this is going to be important. Out there in the ether, a lot of people say it should be done because it's fair. We agree it should be done because it's fair. However, numbers are going to count. And the big number is loopholes. What all the tax writing committees, the Congress, what they're very concerned about is not so much what they're getting today that they won't get tomorrow. That's part of the equation. But they want to know how this could be abused and create a larger drain on the U.S. Treasury. So we were very careful in our roadmap to look at those areas. And we firmly believe that residence-based taxation should not cost the government in tax revenue. We don't think it will win on fairness alone. We think you have to have good, solid numbers that show the Congress this isn't going to leak revenue. It has to be tied against abuse, because that's where the big cost comes in. That's where the big focus is. We see this in all the meetings that we have up on Capitol Hill. And it has to be done with legislation. It can't be done with regulatory fixes. It can't be done because you win a legal case. We need legislation. I won't spend too much time on how RBT helps U.S. citizens overseas. I think all of you know this would just make your lives a whole lot simpler in terms of the filing requirements, and also would allow you to invest and think about investing in the jurisdiction where you live. It would also address some of the lockout issues or all of the lockout issues on foreign financial accounts. So what legislation is currently in the Congress that is addressing these issues. So I have highlighted 5 pieces of legislation. The last one, HR 5799, has been introduced in past Congresses and hasn't been introduced in the current one, but we have been told it will be. So I'll talk specifically about each one of these pieces of legislation. 2 in there are not directly tax related, but they certainly help us with all the work that we're doing to create awareness on tax. One thing to keep in mind as I step through all of these, a lot of times you'll look at the legislation and you'll say, well, it's not going far enough. It's not RBT. It's just a start. It's a simplification. It's only touching on 1 or 2 areas. But it's wrong to believe that not supporting the representatives who are doing this is going to push them to move further. The representatives want to see that their efforts are appreciated and acknowledged. And if you want them to do more, we should certainly support their efforts. We can always tell them this is great. We think it's terrific, but we would like to see more done. Always fair to say that, but to say, no, I'm not going to support this because it doesn't go far enough doesn't really help the conversation. So the first piece of legislation is the Commission on Americans Living Abroad Act. And this calls on the Congress to create a commission to investigate the issues that are affecting U.S. citizens overseas. This is a great effort. Below, I'll talk a little bit about the pros and cons. The big thing on all these pieces of legislation, and it's on every slide, and I'm going to repeat it over and over again, is that it indicates and shows that Congress is paying attention, that other members in Congress are concerned about these problems. This is not a niche issue. This is not something that just, a small group of individuals overseas is complaining about. It's not something just that ACA is talking about. This really is a problem because a representative has identified it and done something about it. It also gives the opportunity to point to solutions. If you don't like our solution, take a look at what's being proposed in this bill. It helps support the call for hearings. ACA firmly believes that we need hearings. Hearings, we think, will achieve the same results as a commission, but we think it can do it on a more timely basis and a little more directly, should I say, because hearings present in front of the committees that are responsible for then taking action. Some of the cons, creating commissions is a bit divided on party lines. Democrats are more interested in investigating and pulling together information, whereas Republicans are a little more interested in just moving ahead and taking actions. Commissions do often take a long time. By the time they are pulled together, they review and assess and then, provide a report. However, it's a great initiative for our community. The second piece of legislation is the Tax Simplification for Americans Abroad Act. Some of you may be familiar with this. Is called the Beyer Act. Congressman Beyer introduced it twice. The second time in this Congress with some modifications to the first bill. But essentially, it creates a simplified reporting form that would reduce the tax compliance. It would be a worksheet, and if you fall under earnings under $400,000, tick a few boxes in terms of your deductions and so forth, you would only have a simple 1 or 2 page tax return. Again, the top 2 things that are important to think about with this legislation is that it indicates to Congress, not a niche issue. There's a problem out there. Someone's gone out there and really thought about it. You don't like what we're proposing, take a look at what some of the solutions are in this bill. And the other great advantage is that the National Taxpayer Advocate has highlighted the compliance and complexity of filing from overseas. So this is exactly what this bill is trying to achieve. It does address some of the most pressing problems. It increase the income that's subject, or change the category of income that's subject to the FEIE. It'll have now include both earned and unearned income. It addresses a bit the duplicative nature of FATCA and FBAR. It also categorizes U.S. Social Security as foreign sourced, and it would be taxed in the jurisdiction and not by the U.S. And it obviously simplifies the compliance and filing requirements. Some of the cons, perhaps, it only applies to a portion of U.S. citizens overseas, although that actually can work to our benefit because it does demonstrate to Congress that this community is not the high wealth demographic and that most of the tax evasion legislation that's causing us problems is targeted towards. It really shows Congress, hey, there's a community out there. This representative has identified it. These folks need relief. Congress might think that this legislation fixes all the problems. It could slow down a bit a wider discussion of RBT. As I mentioned before, the next piece of legislation, the Overseas Americans Financial Access Act, is due to be reintroduced into Congress. It eases the reporting regime for FATCA by excluding accounts held outside of the country, excluding the reporting of financial accounts held in the country of residency of the U.S. citizens. So many of you on this call, if you're living in Thailand or Germany or Switzerland, your accounts in the country where you live, they are not offshore for you, they are local. And this would alleviate a lot of the financial account lockout. Again, the top two things, it shows this is not a niche issue. It shows that someone's out there thinking about legislative solutions. Take a look at this legislation. You'll learn more about the problems. It also demonstrates ACA's professionalism. We have been out there for a long time advocating for same country exemption. We believe that it can be done through regulation. Again, we know that this is not RBT. It's not going to solve RBT, but it would give at least some relief in the short term for the financial bank account lockout. This provision is supported by the National Taxpayer Advocate. That really helps. Some of the cons on this is that FATCA is so shrouded in the veil of addressing tax evasion that anytime anything's proposed to kind of ease things, it's often looked at as opening the door to more bad behavior. And then again, this legislation, we don't want Congress to believe that it fixes all the problems. And I have to say, a lot of offices are aware of the problems of FATCA. There's rarely an office I go into where a representative hasn't been contacted by a constituent about their problems with banking or financial lockout. So we don't want it to slow things down. So the Earned Benefits Equality and Family Reunification Act, it's not a tax legislation, but the act, it proposes the creation of a pilot program for international coverage under Medicare. So even though it's not tax legislation, it gives us a really good opportunity once again to say to Congress, there's problems out there for the community of Americans living overseas. There are tax issues. And by the way, there's also issues with accessing Medicare. And so it really helps support the call for Congress to look in and investigate these problems. The pilot program hasn't been completely identified. We're working with the representative who introduced the legislation to learn more. It could save the Medicare system some money, but it could also cost money to launch. So that could be an issue for the legislation. The other piece of legislation, which again is not technically a tax issue, is the Social Security Fairness Act. And this piece of legislation repeals the windfall elimination provision, which you may or may not be aware that when you draw on U.S. Social Security, and if you have a foreign pension, you could have your U.S. Social Security reduced because of your your foreign pension. Again, the top two things on this legislation is that once again it shows Congress there's a list of issues, a lot of issues. You've got to start paying attention. There are tax issues, there's issues with Social Security, there's issues with other topics. Congress, this isn't just small niche issues. These are things that are really important, and you need to pay attention. This bill has really good bipartisan support, and there's a lot of active advocacy because WEP affects not only foreign pensions, but it also affects a lot of groups domestically. Social Security insolvency is a really heated topic in Congress. If you've turned on the news at all on the US side, you'll see that this comes up lots, and might have difficulty passing if it's perceived that it's going to cost Social Security. We can often, our community, be cut out of this legislation because the sourcing of information on foreign pensions, Social Security often falls back on, well, we don't have direct access to that information. But once again, these are all really great initiatives, and they should be supportive. They're really creating a lot of awareness up in Congress and in the administration on the problems. So tax legislation in general, what's the crystal ball for this year and next year? A lot of the individual tax provisions from the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act are going to expire. A few of them are highlighted there on the slide. We really think that hearings are going to happen. We know that Congress has got to address these issues because of the provisions that are expiring. So there's going to be a lot of work on committee, in offices, and it is a golden opportunity for us to lobby for residence-based taxation and to really push for hearings, because the House Ways and Means Committee, Senate Finance, they're all going to be doing or holding hearings. What is our strategy, ACA strategy, in 2024? So we're going to continue to use our research. This has been really, really important in offices. It's really helped to round out a lot of the research and data that offices currently have, but don't have a full view into. We're going to continue to lobby the important tax writing committees, the House and Senate, the Joint Committee on Taxation, Treasury, regular meetings. We're going to update them, and we hope to refresh some of our research. We want to increase membership in the Americans Abroad Caucus. We hope to do this through our ACA Political Action Committee. The caucus, don't underestimate the caucus. It's being co-chaired by Congresswoman Titus. She's really motivated to do a lot more with that caucus, and it can really help us up in Congress. Continue with our regular meetings with champions. Push for hearings. We are really, really pushing for hearings. This is really, for us, critical and important. We've got to get this data. We've got to get testimonials from individuals like yourselves really in front of the decision makers. Continue to develop partnerships and use the existing RBT coalition. There is a coalition. There's AmChams, other tax advocacy groups who are part of that coalition. It can really help us to raise awareness. Engage members and non-members in our write-in campaigns. These really, really work. All of you on this call, the first thing, we'd love for all of you who are not members to become members of ACA, but I would say above and beyond, engage in our write-in campaigns. These really work. They really help us when we walk into representatives' offices, because a lot of times through the write-in campaign, those offices are already well aware of the problems and eager to learn more from ACA. So again, we are really uniquely positioned to push on all of this. Because of our reputation here in Washington, D.C., and because we are here and have the proximity to these offices. So who are we meeting with and continue to meet with? Joint Committee on Taxation, very important committee. These are the folks who run the numbers on legislation. We have a close relationship. Our research is really embedded in their offices. We go back to them for regular updates. really super important. U.S. Treasury Department. The Treasury is very interested in RBT, and they're very interested in our numbers and our research. House Ways and Means Committee, we're regularly meeting with the Tax Council and the staff. IRS, we sit on their advisory committee, and our research, again, is deeply embedded in those offices. Senate Finance Committee, we are present in those offices and maintain contact, although most of our focus right now is on the House side, because that's really where legislation is going to begin. Again, the Americans Abroad Caucus, we're staying close to that caucus, and we want to work to grow it. It can be a real advantage, we believe, to bring focus and awareness to these issues. House and Senate leadership goes without saying, cultivating new contacts and maintaining the great contacts that we have. National Taxpayer Advocate, this is a really important administrative organization. We work really closely with them, and they've been able to highlight our issues. Most recently, Aaron Collins, in the annual report to Congress, brought to light, I think, under most serious problems, we were highlighted in 2 footnotes, and not 2 footnotes, and 2 bullet points in that. And then the Government Accountability Office, another important office that runs research and numbers. So what is the importance of this ACA research? Why is it helping? It's no surprise that a lot of offices up in Congress lack complete tax compliance data. And ACA's research has been able to augment that data. And we're the only, I think, private organization out there with this kind of research. What's important to know is that these offices want solid data and numbers, not just survey data. Survey data is great. There's a lot of surveys out there on what the problems are, how many people are affected by financial lockout. That's great data, and that should really be presented in hearings. But the offices that are looking at the cost of something like RBT or any change to the tax code, they want this solid data so they can understand how many Americans are out there. Because if you don't start with a good number, you can have disastrous results. We've gone out there through our research and identified that of the community we believe is 5.2 million strong, 4 million are civilian, and that is what RBT legislation affects that community. And 2.4 of those citizens are tax compliant, and 1.6 do not appear on a tax filing. So 2.4 citizens appear on a return, 1.6 million don't. We really believe a lot of the reasons for the non-filing is a misunderstanding of the FEIE and of foreign tax credits. We see all the time, and if you go out on social media, you will see it as well. People say, well, I don't file because I earn under the threshold of the FEIE, or I'm living in a country where, the tax rate is 70%. I would only be at 23% in the US. I'm not going to file. That doesn't mean you should not be filing. You should file, and you use those tools. And then at the end of the day, you're probably not going to owe the U.S. government any tax income. So we believe a lot of the problem in the 1.6 number is related to that. And also, our research shows that U.S. citizens will still remain invested in the U.S. So not all the tax income is going to go away overnight. Many Americans, for a lot of reasons, want to remain invested in the U.S. So to tie things up, ACA membership help us support our efforts. We're a primarily volunteer organization. We can only do the work we do up on Capitol Hill through memberships and donations. Basic membership is only $70. It gives you a whole lot of advantages. You can see them listed there. It gives you the ability to contribute to our political action committee, and also the ability to apply for an online U.S. bank account. Some of you may have been faced with the problem of losing your stateside or U.S. banking access because of some of the interpretation of the Know Your Client regulations. With the State Department Federal Credit Union, they know how to work with individuals who live outside the United States. You don't need a U.S. address. They are not part of the State Department. They are simply a credit union that was developed to service State Department employees that were changing addresses and locales frequently. So, and again, I encourage everyone join our write-in campaigns. Go and visit our website. Please join ACA, but if not, please support our write-in campaigns because they really, really do work. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. So I think I'll go back to not sharing my screen. Hugo?
Fantastic. Look, thank you very much for that presentation, Marylouise. That's excellent. Had lots of questions come in while you were speaking, and I'm sure to the audience.
I'm not sharing my screen anymore, am I?
No, that's
Okay.
yeah, all set.
Okay.
Okay,
Terrific.
So yeah, we've had lots of questions come in. I'm sure lots more will come in. Keep those coming. What I'll do is I'll read some of them out, and let's see how many we can get through.
Great.
So one question just is, would it be possible for you to share the slide deck afterwards?
I believe so. I'll circle back with you, Hugo, and
Yeah, or
see how
possibly,
you're sharing
yeah.
data and information, and we'll
I was going to
let you
suggest
know.
that they kind of reach out via the ACA website and kind of reach out directly. But let's yeah, it certainly is available, isn't it? Theoretically, we just have to work out how. Somebody else said they recently read the entire Taxpayer Advocate report. This is Jesus Garcia. They said, why doesn't the TPA recommend RBT as a solution for the taxation of overseas US citizens?
Well, they do make some legislative recommendations. They have in the past supported simplification and reducing the cost of compliance and simplification. They've highlighted that. We work really closely with the National Taxpayer Advocate. However, their role is really not to propose legislation. Their role is more to identify issues and call on Congress to address them. So they do sometimes point. I'll give you that. They have pointed to obviously the Overseas Financial Access Act. So fingers crossed, maybe as things move on, they will become more interested.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is the Taxpayer Advocate part of the IRS?
They're an independent watchdog organization. Yes.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Another question is several European countries are challenging FATCA, including France and Belgium. What are your thoughts on this? Do you believe foreign countries could end FATCA? Or I guess US citizens having to comply if they're residents in those countries?
That's a great question, but unfortunately, our plate is full with paying attention to efforts on the U.S. side to fix the problems with FATCA. So we do know that there are several initiatives. That's always good. I would say it's always good because it raises awareness. And also on the US side, on the Treasury side, it does show to Treasury that, hey, what ACA and other organizations are talking about is a real issue because we have, foreign governments, other organizations coming to us saying, hey, there are problems here. So I really can't answer the question definitively if they're gonna overturn it. I think it helps with awareness. I think the solution has to come from our side.
Yeah, that makes sense. There are a couple of questions about the WEP legislation.
Mhm.
Would any relief granted be retroactive, do you think?
I wouldn't. I wouldn't think so, no, but until really, that legislation is, marked up and goes through, the system, it's really hard to know what could be put in or taken out.
Sure. Many members of the Americans Abroad Caucus don't co-sponsor these bills. And the question is, how can we kind of get more of those other organizations, I guess, on board?
How to get more of them on board?
Hmm.
Well, that's what ACA really wants to concentrate on in 2024 and help, the co-chair. We're currently looking for a Republican co-chair. Congresswoman Titus is a Democrat. We had Elvira Salazar. She was the Republican co-chair. She's still on the caucus, but she had to step down because of some committee assignments, that she has. So we really want to help, that caucus, because we agree that a lot more of them should get on board on. Some of them have, co-signed, some of the legislation. There have been also letters that have been issued from the Americans Abroad Caucus, with members who have signed on. But we agree, they should really, act more as a group, and try to coalesce around a lot of these problems and support more actively. So ACA is really going to be working on that, in 2024.
Excellent. Here's a question about writing to representatives and senators. Does ACA have a template that it can share?
So what we have is, if you go to our website, we have a bunch of write-in campaigns, and that's what we use. The beauty of those is that on some of them, there is, maybe a pre-pasted 2-sentence, explain the problem, but we allow you to write in how the problem affects you. This is really important. A lot of congressional offices, when they get these standard template letters, they recognize them as templates. The offices really are tuned in to people who write about how an issue or a problem is affecting them personally. And it doesn't really take all that many write ins to an office to get them to sit up and say, there's a problem. We've seen this with our write-in campaigns. We look at the back end and we say, okay, 25 or 50 letters have gone into, Congresswoman Pelosi's office. Let's try to get a meeting with those people. And when we go in, the people we're meeting with will often say to us, I want to learn more about this problem. They might have even reached out to us, because we have had constituents write us about it. So it's really important. Go to our website, take a look. It's on our slider. I forget what number slider it is, but it's the ACA write-in campaigns. We're going to be adding more. And in fact, we're going to add a campaign that is specifically just write to your representative. Write to them about, anything you're interested in. But the campaigns that we have are in support of hearings. They're, petitioning chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee to make hearings a priority, supporting, the Tax Simplification Act, supporting the commission bill. So go to our website. That's how you can, make that communication into your, congressional offices.
Thank you. That's brilliant. There's a question here about numbers of Americans living abroad. Mary Jo said, why does the State Department estimate 9 million Americans live abroad, whereas your numbers were a lot lower? What's the real number?
Fantastic question, because we just met with the State Department, who has told us they are no longer publishing that number because they recognize it is very difficult to source the data. The thing you have to remember with the State Department number over time is that they're not looking at it as a tax number. They're looking at it for a lot of different reasons. Evacuation purposes. So it might be padded because they want to make sure day comes they have to get X amount of Americans out of X country, we want to make sure we get all of them out. Staffing purposes, they may be looking at those numbers because they say, well, there's so many passports that we have to process and so many. So they were in the past collecting that data for a lot of different reasons. But they have recognized that it's caused a lot of problems because people often cite it. And again, it can really distort numbers, especially when you're trying to get to numbers like we're trying to get to. How many Americans actually out there, living out there, are there? How many should be filing? How many are not filing? So I don't think you'll be seeing a number from the State Department publicly issued any longer. At least that's what they told us.
Interesting. Another question about numbers. How many Americans abroad would benefit from the tax simplification bill?
Oh, I don't know that number off the top of my, I don't
Surely,
know that number
surely,
off the top of my head.
it's surely everyone would benefit because in terms of
Um,
simplified filing.
well, yeah, but you have to be under a certain threshold.
Oh, yeah.
And so I don't know. I can try have that person send an email to ACA. I'll try to dig into and see if we can get him that number. Not sure. We still think RBT is RBT benefits everyone.
Yeah. Okay. A couple more questions. So, where do things stand with regard to tax simplification?
Meaning that bill.
I assume so. Yeah.
So right now they're looking for co-sponsors. Again, that's why we have a write-in campaign to show support. Um, Again, it's a great initiative. What we really want is residence-based taxation, but we know, again, that Congressman Beyer is very interested in our issues. He wants to do something. As I said, he introduced this initially, and when he went back to introduce into this Congress, he made additional changes to the bill in recognition of, the problems that are out there. So, support the bill, help him to get more co-sponsors, because that's how it's going to get pushed up the chain on Capitol Hill.
Another quick question about the numbers of Americans abroad you quoted and sort of where you got those numbers. Is that your own research, the 2.4 million and the 1.6 million who aren't filing?
Yes, that's the research that we did. ACA Global Foundation. We worked with or hired a group called District Economics Group, and they are an independent consultancy. Many of them actually at one time worked at committee, on tax committee staff, and they went out and did the research. If you go on our website, there should be a link directly to a summary of that research, and you can look at look through that for more information, or shoot us an email. I'm happy to give you more information on that.
Right. Somebody says Secretary Janet Yellen has the authority to resolve all FBAR issues, the threshold, who is affected, etc. Why don't associations working with Americans abroad issues not get together, request a meeting with Secretary Yellen and ask her to use that authority?
I think I've seen this come through on an email to us. We're taking a look at that. Stay
Yeah.
tuned.
Yeah. Is that something that sort of premise that Secretary has the authority to resolve the issues? Is that something that you can confirm, or is that the part that's
I mean, we'd really have to look into it.
yeah.
This just kind of came across our desks the other day.
Okay.
Oftentimes, yes, people think it's a magic pen, and they could be right. But there may be other things in there
Yeah.
that prevent that from happening. So again, I really, at this point, really couldn't,
Sure.
answer. But we are always talking to, the Treasury and to the leadership. So they are aware of the problems, and they're aware of some of the solutions that are already out there. Personally, I would push for what's already out there, but we'll just have to see. It's always willing to look at lots of new ideas.
Yeah, I would say to whoever sent the question, perhaps write to ACA with sort of where you found that information about that authority, and so they can look sort of into that. There are a couple of questions about writing campaigns. One is, who to write to if you haven't lived in the US. Who is your representative? If you haven't lived in the US for a long time, or possibly you were born abroad, but you're affected by these issues.
So if you go on our writing campaign, you will see that if you lived in the United States, even if you lived here, left 40 years ago, whatever your last known address in the United States, that is technically the address you would use to vote from. And it is also the address of whoever the congressperson and the 2 senators of that state, they are your representative. So our write-in campaign allows you to go in there and do that. You put that address in there and it will draw up those representatives. For people who were born abroad and never lived in the United States, there are only 13 states that do not allow children of US citizens who were born abroad not to use their parents' last known address in the United States. So if I can do my math, that means that there's 37 states that allow and 13 that don't. So indeed, you may be able, you may think you can't vote or you can't write to your representative, but if you're from those 37 states, you definitely can. And we've often brought up the issue of the 13 states that don't allow that.
Right, that answers another question as well, saying that there are filters that prevent writing to one's member of Congress without an address in the
Yeah.
constituency.
Yeah.
So
You just
yeah,
gotta, whatever address that is, or was, you've got to use it.
somebody comments that what is often neglected in these discussions is the cost of compliance in terms of hiring CPAs in 2 countries. Can amount to thousands of dollars. And is this something ACA is also aware of?
Yeah, we bring that up all the time, in all the offices, that you have people who are having to comply in the country in which they live, and then oftentimes having to pay $2,000-3,000 to comply, only to find out that they don't owe the U.S. government anything. That was a big push behind Congressman Beyer taking a look at how to fix that, and his legislation, the Tax Simplification for Americans Abroad Act.
Yeah. So a question about the SDFC account. Am I allowed to have a US checking account and a US debit card while living abroad? Does SDFC offer these services?
Yes, they do. I would encourage you to go on our website, look for the page on SDFCU. It has a list of FAQs, and it'll tell you exactly what you can get through the State Department Federal Credit Union. But yes, a checking account and debit card are 2 of the services.
You covered this one already a little bit, but just to restate, with the writing campaigns, what emphasis would you recommend to get the representatives' attention? Unfairness, costs, what do they care about?
So I would, write about your problem. It's really hard to say, here are the top 5 things. And again, we really find that the most effective is put in there how it affects you. If it's the cost of compliance, if it's the fact that you've been taken off your spouse's bank accounts, it's the fact that, it's you have 2 tax returns and it's just too burdensome. You can't invest, whatever it is that affects you directly. Again, we try on some of the campaigns, we have a short intro, but we really encourage people to focus on how, policy and legislation and regulation is affecting you. That's the most effective.
Yeah, keep it personal. So Thomas says, is there any legislation addressed at IRS, the IRS recognizing foreign corporate pension funds as tax-free, as long as it's pre-retirement?
Not that I'm aware of. I know that this has come up. We've often in our meetings have advocated for broadening the acceptance of foreign pension funds. We've had conversations with the IRS, with Treasury, individual offices, but I'm not aware of any actual legislation that's in the works on this.
Thank you. Question about ACA. Tom is curious how large the team is, how many full-times and part-times and volunteers?
So if you go on our website, you'll see our executive committee, and it doesn't highlight the individuals that are here in Washington, D.C., but there's myself, there's Charles Bruce, who's legal counsel. We also have Glenn Frost, who's he's also a lawyer, and we have Jonathan Lakowitz, who's out of Boston, who often comes down to help us in Washington, D.C., our administrative assistant. So we've got a tight team here in Washington, D.C., and you can see all the players on our website.
Fantastic. Somebody says, polarized climate in Congress. What are the chances of the legislation getting traction?
Sorry, I missed that first part of the question.
In the current polarized climate in Congress, what are the chances of the legislation getting traction?
So I don't know what specific legislation, but I'm going to assume any legislation that's affecting us getting traction. Again, this issue, we see it with the WEP legislation. It's got fantastic bipartisan support. On tax issues, we've never, all offices we're in, whether they're Democratic or Republican, nobody looks at it and says, oh, this, doesn't make sense. I can't get on board with this. Everyone who we meet with understands it as, something that's just good tax policy. We think there could actually be a lot of bipartisan support. How it's going to play out currently up on Capitol Hill, we see it on some of this really key legislation that's got a lot of media focus on it. Sure, that could be a problem. I think it's a less of a problem with this issue because we really do see a lot of bipartisan support, and we can point to other legislation. Again, it's really important to be able to say, hey, it also affects, there's a piece of legislation out there on another issue, great bipartisan support, you should get on board with this. So we see good support on both sides of the aisle. But again, it's near to impossible to guess day to day what could happen up on Capitol Hill. Fingers crossed.
Just try to do a couple more. There's one question. You mentioned the Coalition for Residence-Based Taxation. Could you talk a little bit about that?
So yeah, the RBT Coalition is a group that's come together. Like I said, there are a few AmChams on there. The Taxpayer Union is a member of that. So there's, kind of tax organizations that are interested in good tax policy. And it's how it's important. It itself doesn't really do anything. It supports the call for more education on residence-based taxation and on why residence-based taxation makes sense and is good tax policy. So it's really meant to create awareness. And it's really good for us to be able to go into offices, kind of like with the legislation, where we're able to say, hey, not just ACA talking about this, not just a small group of, Americans living overseas. This is a problem. This legislator has identified it. And we can do the same with the RBT coalition. So, it's not just a problem for individuals. Look, you have AmChams who have identified it. You have other tax policy organizations who recognize that it's an issue. So it really helps support the problem and build awareness.
Fantastic. There are quite a few comments as well as questions. Thanks everyone very much for contributing those. There are a couple of people who have said they've just joined ACA based on this, so thank you very much to them, and everyone do go have a look. It's the ACA website, I think I'm right in saying, is americansabroad.org.
Yep.
So head over there, have a look. We're just coming up to the hour, so Marylouise, thank you very much for the fantastic presentation, and thanks to everyone for joining us. If you have more questions, reach out via the ACA website, which is americansabroad.org. And we hope to see you for more sessions, more presentations as part of the conference running over today and the next couple of days. Our next session is in just an hour's time on insurance considerations and solutions for expats in 2024. So if you haven't already, you can register for that at usexpatconference.com.